one of the advantages of having a vibrant press is that you get to watch on television things unfold, not always as they were planned. And we saw in Kharkiv, we saw in that town a group of separatists who stormed the Opera House, mistaking it for City Hall. Now, one of two possibilities here. One is that people in the town are ambivalent about opera and civics and know neither where the Opera House is or City Hall is. But I think more likely, since the Russian camera crew was there filming this and filmed the Russian tricolor being put up on the Opera House, and then one of the locals said, that's not City Hall. And then you got to see them take it back down, run back across town, and you saw the so-called separatists in their masks and such go up and actually put it on City Hall. And again, second take for the Russian camera crew. The reality here seems to be that you do have a lot of foreign influence coming into the country, as reported to me and Judge Poe when we were in Dnipropetrovsk, that is in the business of putting up Russian flags and in the business of bringing in a great deal of heavy weaponry, as General Breedlove has shared with Congress. So the question I have at the end of the day, and I'd like each of the panelists to just give me their take, what do you believe President Putin's goals are in Ukraine, in all of this? Because this takes a considerable expenditure of resources from Russia in order to finance this kind of an operation.
Mr. Chairman, I would say, I'd be interested, the fellow panelists, I would say Mr. Putin would like to have instability in Ukraine so that it cannot pursue the movement toward Europe, movement toward European institutions, that its president, elected overwhelmingly, its people in polls indicate that they would like to do. He would like to cause that instability and is fomenting that instability in eastern Ukraine.
I'd like to hear the take on every member on the panel.
If I may, could I read again from my testimony?
Sure.
I think we were out.
Dr. Go ahead.
From the moment the regime of Viktor Yanukovych was overthrown in Kiev in the end of February, Russia, that is Vladimir Putin, has pursued three strategic goals. First, to punish, humiliate, destabilize, if possible dismember, and ultimately derail a Europe-bound Ukraine. Second, to prevent the West from imposing meaningful binding sanctions. And third, to continue to solidify Mr. Putin's domestic political base by rallying it around the flag. And I also noted that from my point of view of somebody who studies Russian politics, I think the third goal is the most important one, because Putin's popularity, trust in him, and most importantly, the desire to see him as reelected as president in 2018, by all objective public opinion polls, were at record lows at the end of 2013. Now all of those indicators are at record high. That, of course, is not Russia's privileges. Countries at war rally around the leader. And I think these three goals will continue to motivate Putin, and which is why, answering Mr. Chairman's call to reach the settlement with Russia, I think we should be realistic about what the goals are, and I think that settlement could be reached, but that would require Vladimir Putin to change the strategy. The problem with changing the strategy is that it's so now intimately and centrally tied to the legitimacy and popularity of his regime that it would be extremely hard for him to change the course.
Well, and for the remaining two speakers, I mean, watching Russian television and watching this projection of this image, they are beating you. They are beating ethnic Russian speakers, right?
Yep.
That's the theme. But it's not just the theme in Ukraine. It's the theme in the former Soviet states. You see this broadcast into other states in Central Asia and, in the Baltics, and in Eastern Europe. And so that's the other part of my question. It's not just that this message is directed in Ukraine. It's directed to Russian speakers who are listening across the
I think you're absolutely right. I had a
region.
colleague returning recently from Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
And as you know, northern Kazakhstan
Right.
is essentially ethnic Russian.
Right.
And like Ukraine, Kazakhstan did not exist until the beginning of the Soviet Union. So Putin could say, as he said in his fiery speech following the annexation of Crimea on March 18, 2000 of this year, to the joint session of the Federal Assembly, which is the Russian parliament, he could say, well, there was no Kazakhstan. Those were all Russian lands. He said that about Ukraine. You know,
No,
there was no Ukraine.
I followed that. But I also followed this story out of Russia that the Ukrainians had supposedly crucified a 3-year-old boy and drug his mother behind a tank. This kind of rhetoric is designed to fire up ethnic Russians to a point where they're thinking emotionally rather than logically. And it strikes me that because this is going on, not just in Ukraine but elsewhere, it's very important we engage with broadcasting some kind of surrogate, like we did with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in the day when we did it well. We need something that just broadcasts in perspective, a wider perspective on this, because people are being, they're fueling a rage here, which, already has led to the downing of one jetliner by having inexperienced, separatists who want to wage war, who've shot down, I guess, probably 14 planes by now. But that kind of anger that's being generated is going to be a real problem for the region.
Correct.
Yeah, on the question of what Putin would be seeking in Ukraine, I think hard. I mean, I think certainly he wants an agreement on autonomy. I think, in other words, let's put it this way. I think the last thing he wants to do is introduce Russian forces into the country. I think that would be a disaster for him. I think it would be a costly mistake, just in terms of just the financing of it. But then politically, even more horrendous. I think in terms of poisoning his relationship with Europe. I think in terms of poisoning his relations with Kiev, because ultimately Russia has to have some kind of relationship with Kiev. Once all this blows over, and when they get back to some kind of normalcy. So I don't think he wants to do that. I think what he would like to have is some kind of a negotiated thing, and I think that he's indicated this to the effect of an agreement on autonomy, widespread autonomy for the various regions of Ukraine, and things then that take Ukraine out of the equation as some kind of a problem. For Russia. In other words, to do with making non-NATO membership part of the, sort of a constitutional sort of thing about neutrality or non-alliance status. Things like agreement on language rights, so that language rights are protected.
But all of that would be done by Poroshenko anyway. Poroshenko is in support of language rights. It's very clear, and certainly on the NATO issue as well. But anyway, my time's expired, and thank you.